Millionaire needs a fake fiancée for a business deal. She steals everyone's heart, including him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main characters. The story begins on a crisp autumn morning in New York City, where towering glass skyscrapers cast long shadows over crowded sidewalks. Inside the top floor of Whitmore Enterprises, a powerful man sat at the head of a polished mahogany table. Alexander Whitmore, 36 years old, brilliant, ruthless, and the youngest CEO in the company's history. His reputation in the business world was legendary. He closed deals no one else could, built empires from ashes, and never once let personal matters interfere with business. But that morning, there was a storm in his steel-blue eyes. The board of directors had made it clear. If Alexander wanted to secure the international partnership worth billions of dollars, he needed to prove stability. Investors wanted to see a family man, not a lone wolf who lived in penthouse suites and kept his heart locked behind iron doors. The condition was simple, yet absurd. He needed to walk into the next shareholder gala with a fiancée on his arm. He could have chosen any socialite from the glittering circles of Manhattan. Women had always hovered around him, attracted to his wealth, his sharp jawline, and the aura of power that followed him like a shadow. But Alexander was not a man who trusted easily. He despised pretenses. He knew every fake smile and every flattering word hid ulterior motives. That was when fate, with its cruel sense of humor, placed someone unexpected in his path. Miles away from the shimmering skyscrapers, in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, lived a woman whose world could not have been more different. Emma Hayes, 28, worked 2 jobs just to pay the rent of her modest one-bedroom apartment. By day, she managed a small flower shop tucked between a laundromat and a bakery. By night, she waited tables at a local diner. Life had not been kind to her. Her father had passed away years ago, leaving behind medical debts. Her younger brother was still in college, and Emma had become both sister and provider, carrying burdens far heavier than her fragile shoulders should bear. But despite the hardships, Emma had not lost her spark. She had a smile that lit up dim rooms, and a kindness that slipped into every gesture, whether it was arranging daisies for a lonely old woman or slipping an extra slice of pie to a tired cab driver at the diner. She was the kind of woman who did good without expecting anything in return, invisible to most of the world, but unforgettable to those she touched. Their worlds were never meant to collide. Yet destiny often writes its greatest stories in the strangest ways. On a rainy Friday evening, Alexander found himself in that very Brooklyn diner. His driver had taken a wrong turn, traffic was impossible, and for once the CEO who controlled everything had no choice but to wait. He sat in a corner booth, his tailored suit looking out of place under the buzzing neon lights. That was when Emma walked over, pen tucked behind her ear, balancing plates with practiced grace. "Coffee?" she asked with a warm smile, as if she had no idea that the man in front of her was worth more than entire neighborhoods put together. Alexander studied her. She did not stutter, she did not fawn. She simply poured him a cup of steaming black coffee and moved on to the next table. For a man used to admiration and fear, her indifference was disarming. That night, when boardroom obligations weighed heavily on his shoulders, a wild idea began to take root. She was ordinary, she was real, and perhaps she was exactly the illusion he needed to pull off the perfect lie. The following week, Alexander could not shake the memory of the woman from the diner, Emma Hayes. The way she smiled without expectation, the way she carried herself as if kindness was her armor. In his world, everyone wanted something from him: money, influence, connections. But she had looked at him like he was just another customer, another tired soul in need of coffee. That impression lingered long after the rain stopped. When his assistant reminded him of the upcoming shareholder gala, the knot in his chest tightened. The deadline was approaching. He needed someone on his arm, someone convincing enough to silence the whispers of the board. And then, almost against his own logic, he found himself thinking about her again. The waitress, who was not dazzled by his last name. 2 days later, His black town car pulled up outside the small flower shop where Emma spent her mornings. Through the glass window, he saw her arranging tulips in a vase, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up. She looked so different from the women in glittering gowns he usually encountered, yet there was a quiet elegance about her. Emma looked up when the door chimed. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized him. The man from the diner. The one in the expensive suit who had barely touched his coffee. "Mr. Whitmore, right?" she asked carefully, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Alexander inclined his head. "Yes. May I have a word with you?" She blinked, puzzled. "At the flower shop?" He gave a faint smile, one that never quite reached his eyes. "Preferably somewhere more private. I have a proposition for you." Oh. Minutes later, they sat across from each other at the small table in the back office, surrounded by shelves of ribbon and half-empty boxes of roses. Emma clasped her hands, wary but curious. Alexander leaned forward, his voice calm but deliberate. "I need someone to act as my fiancée," he said plainly. "It is for a business arrangement. In return, you will be compensated generously." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Emma stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You cannot be serious. You barely know me." "I am very serious," Alexander replied. "And I do not need to know you. What I need is someone who can convince a room full of investors that I am a man prepared to settle down." "You intrigued me. You are different. You do not come from the same circle, and that is precisely why you would be believable." Emma's cheeks flushed. Her first instinct was outrage. "So you want me to lie for you? To stand by your side like some purchased accessory?" Alexander did not flinch. "I am offering a contract, Miss Hayes. 3 months. Attend public events with me. Smile when necessary. Pretend to be engaged. That is all. At the end, you walk away with enough money to pay your debts, secure your brother's education, and perhaps breathe for the first time in years. No strings attached." Her breath caught. He knew. Somehow this man, with all his wealth and influence, had discovered her struggles. It felt invasive, unfair. Yet his words pierced through her defenses, because they also struck at the heart of her reality. Rent overdue, bills stacking on the counter, the weight of responsibility that never seemed to lift. "I do not want your pity," she whispered. "You will not have it," Alexander said firmly. "This is not charity, this is business. You will help me, and I will help you. Nothing more." Oh. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Emma stared at the faded wallpaper, at her chipped nails, at the man who was offering her both humiliation and salvation in a single breath. Every instinct told her to refuse, to hold on to dignity even if it meant drowning in debt. But then she pictured her brother, hunched over textbooks, working part-time to cover tuition. She saw the exhaustion in her own reflection every morning. Her voice trembled as she finally asked, "What are the rules?" Alexander's gaze softened, just slightly. "No real feelings, no crossing the line. We maintain appearances in public, nothing more. When it is over, the contract ends, and we go our separate ways." Emma exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. She hated herself for even considering it. Yet the reality was clear. The deal was a cage, but perhaps one with a key to freedom. At last, she lifted her chin, eyes steady despite the storm inside. "Fine, I will do it, but do not think for a second that I am impressed by your money or your world." A flicker of something admiration perhaps crossed Alexander's face. "Good. That is exactly why you are perfect for this." And with those words, the contract was sealed, not on paper, but in the fragile agreement between two strangers whose lives were about to intertwine in ways neither of them could predict. The first week of their arrangement revealed exactly how different Alexander Whitmore and Emma Hayes truly were. Their first public appearance together took place at a high-profile charity gala in Midtown Manhattan. The ballroom glistened with crystal chandeliers and golden table settings. Every guest adorned in gowns worth thousands of dollars. Cameras flashed at the entrance as luxury cars lined up one after another. When Alexander stepped out of his sleek black limousine, photographers surged forward, calling his name. He extended a hand, and Emma, in a simple navy dress borrowed from a friend, placed her trembling fingers in his. The moment their hands touched, the crowd erupted, shouting questions, demanding smiles. Emma forced herself to smile, though her heart raced. This was a world she had only seen in magazines, a world of diamonds, champagne, and cold laughter. She kept her chin up, remembering Alexander's words. Appearances only. Inside, they walked together as if they belonged, though Emma felt painfully aware of the whispers around them. Women in glittering gowns eyed her with disdain, murmuring behind jeweled fingers. Men offered Alexander congratulatory nods, their eyes sliding over Emma with curiosity, suspicion, and at times, open judgment. Alexander noticed. His jaw tightened, but his grip on her hand grew firmer, as though silently reassuring her. He leaned down slightly and whispered, "Ignore them. You are here with me. That is all that matters." Emma swallowed hard, surprised by the hint of protectiveness in his tone. The evening passed in a blur of conversations Emma barely understood: stocks, mergers, offshore accounts. She stood at Alexander's side, smiling when necessary, nodding politely when introduced. But more than once, she stumbled over names, unfamiliar etiquette, and the subtle, cruel tests of society women who wanted to expose her as an outsider. At one point, a tall woman draped in emerald silk leaned close and said sweetly, "What charity are you most passionate about, dear?" Her eyes gleamed with challenge. Emma hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Education for underprivileged kids. My brother is in college, and I see how much potential can be lost when students do not have the right support." The woman blinked, taken aback. Around her, a few others chuckled softly, as though amused by Emma's simplicity. But Alexander's lips curved into the faintest smile. He placed a hand at the small of Emma's back and announced, "Which is precisely why our foundation will be expanding its scholarship fund this year. My fiancée has inspired me." The table fell silent. For a rare moment, the laughter died. Emma glanced up at him, startled. Alexander rarely revealed personal motives in public, yet he had just tied his next philanthropic move directly to her words. Later that night, when the music swelled and couples drifted to the dance floor, Alexander extended his hand. "We should dance. People are watching." Emma's cheeks warmed, but she placed her hand in his. He guided her with precision, his movements sharp and controlled. Emma, unused to ballroom dances, stumbled once, nearly stepping on his polished shoe. Heat rose to her face, but Alexander leaned closer, murmuring, so only she could hear, "Relax. Let me lead." Something in his voice softened, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to follow his rhythm. Their eyes met under the glow of chandeliers, and for a breath, the world around them blurred. But reality returned swiftly. At the end of the night, back in the limousine, Emma crossed her arms, frustration etched across her face. "I do not belong in your world. I felt like a fraud the entire night." Alexander loosened his tie, his gaze unreadable. "You did fine. Better than fine, in fact. You spoke from your heart, and it silenced people who have not been silenced in years. Do not underestimate yourself." She shook her head. "You do not understand. I was drowning in there. I do not know the rules of your game." "Okay." He turned to her, his voice low but firm. "Then stop trying to play their game. That is not why I chose you. I did not need another polished socialite who knows every rule. I needed someone real. That is your strength, Emma. Do not lose it." Her breath caught. For once, there was no arrogance in his tone, only conviction. Still, she could not stop the doubt gnawing inside her. As the city lights streaked past the tinted windows, Emma wondered how long she could survive in this masquerade. And Alexander, though he would never admit it, felt the stirrings of something dangerous, admiration that threatened to break the very rules he had written himself. The first cracks in their contract had begun to show. The following weeks blurred into a whirlwind of appearances, dinners, and carefully staged photographs. Emma kept her promise, always standing by Alexander's side, always smiling for the cameras. But behind closed doors, the arrangement was far from simple. In the penthouse, where she now occasionally stayed to keep up appearances, their differences clashed like fire against steel. Emma preferred simple meals, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee in chipped mugs, while Alexander's kitchen was stocked with imported wines, caviar, and silver utensils polished to perfection. One morning, she stood barefoot in his pristine kitchen, frying eggs in a pan, humming softly to herself. When Alexander walked in, fresh from his morning workout, he paused. "You are using olive oil in that pan?" he asked, raising a brow. Emma glanced over her shoulder. "Yes. Why?" He stepped closer, adjusting his cuff. "You are burning it. That pan is stainless steel. It requires low heat." She rolled her eyes. "Well, excuse me, Mr. Michelin star. Some of us cook to eat, not to impress critics." For a heartbeat, silence lingered, and then to her shock, Alexander chuckled. A real, unguarded laugh that softened the sharp lines of his face. Emma froze, spatula in hand, caught off guard by how different he looked when he allowed himself that small moment of levity. Tension simmered between them, sometimes clashing in sharp words, sometimes dissolving into surprising moments of warmth. Emma discovered that beneath Alexander's polished exterior lay a man who carried heavy burdens. He worked late into the night, poring over contracts until his eyes burned. She noticed the exhaustion he never showed in public, the loneliness in a man surrounded by power but starved of trust. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alexander returned to find Emma curled up on the couch with a sketchbook in her lap. She had been drawing flowers, filling the page with soft lines and gentle color. He stood at the doorway, watching her for longer than he intended. "You draw?" he asked finally. Emma looked up, startled, then closed the book quickly. "It is nothing, just a hobby." "May I see?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "It is private." Something in her refusal intrigued him even more. He was a man who had everything at his fingertips, yet here was one thing he could not command. It was both infuriating and fascinating. Meanwhile, Emma began to see cracks in the armor Alexander wore. During a late-night strategy meeting with his board, she accidentally overheard him on a call. His voice low and tired. "No, I will handle it. I always handle it." The weight in his tone revealed a man who carried too much alone. The attraction grew in silence, in stolen glances across crowded rooms, in the way their arguments often ended, with laughter neither of them expected. The rules of their contract, no real feelings, no crossing the line, felt increasingly fragile. One night, at a fundraiser by the Hudson River, Emma wore a simple gown that shimmered under the city lights. As Alexander led her onto the dance floor, his hand firm at her waist, the electricity between them became undeniable. Their steps matched, their breaths synchronized, and for a moment the crowd disappeared. His eyes locked on hers, and Emma felt the world tilt dangerously. "Careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "People will think this is real." Alexander leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "And what if it is starting to feel real?" Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe he was joking, but the seriousness in his tone unsettled her. She looked away, breaking the spell, reminding herself of the contract that bound them. Later that night, in the quiet of the limousine, Emma turned to him. "We cannot do this." "We said no feelings." Alexander's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "You are right, no feelings." But even as he spoke, his hand lingered a second too long on hers, betraying the truth neither of them dared admit. The line between performance and reality was no longer clear, and both of them knew it was only a matter of time before the fragile facade shattered. The pressure mounted as the shareholder gala approached, the most anticipated event of the year. It was not just a party, it was the night when every investor, every board member, and every rival would gather under one roof. For Alexander, it was the battlefield where appearances could decide the fate of billion-dollar deals. For Emma, it was the stage where her role as his fiancée would be tested like never before. The evening began in a blur of flashing cameras and murmured speculation. Dressed in a gown Alexander's stylist had chosen, Emma felt like an imposter in silk. Yet when Alexander offered his arm and she looped hers through his, the crowd gasped in approval. They looked perfect together, the ruthless CEO and his radiant fiancée. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere pulsed with champagne toasts, sharp laughter, and calculated gazes. Emma moved gracefully beside Alexander, smiling when introduced, laughing softly at remarks she barely understood. But as the evening wore on, The line between pretense and reality grew dangerously thin. During a toast, one of the senior board members raised his glass and declared, "To Alexander and the woman who has finally tamed him, may your union bring stability to Whitmore Enterprises." The room erupted in applause. All eyes turned to Emma. She forced a smile, her heart hammering in her chest. Alexander took her hand and lifted it to his lips, pressing a kiss that looked effortless to the crowd, but burned with unspoken tension between them. The guests cheered, cameras flashed, and in that moment, Emma felt the walls of the lie closing in. Later, as the orchestra played a slow waltz, Alexander led her onto the dance floor. His hand rested firmly on her back, his gaze locked onto hers. The crowd watched, but the air between them felt private, electric. "You are trembling," he murmured. "I am not used to being a performance," she whispered back. He tightened his hold slightly, guiding her across the polished floor. "Then stop thinking of it as a performance." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "You are not pretending tonight. Neither am I." Emma's breath caught. The way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the room, made her heart betray the rules they had both sworn to obey. She tried to pull away, to remind herself that this was an act, but Alexander's hand remained steady, his gaze unyielding. The music swelled, and before she could stop him, he leaned in and kissed her. It was supposed to be for the cameras, another staged display of affection. But the moment their lips met, the world around them dissolved. There was no audience, no contract, no business deal. There was only the raw, undeniable truth of what they had been fighting against. The kiss lingered longer than it should have, igniting a fire neither of them could deny. When they finally pulled apart, the ballroom erupted in thunderous applause, mistaking the passion for flawless acting. Emma's cheeks burned, her pulse racing. She wanted to speak, to protest, to remind him of the rules. But Alexander's eyes silenced her, filled with something dangerous, something real. For the rest of the night, every smile, every glance, every touch blurred the boundaries they had drawn. Emma felt herself slipping, her heart betraying the walls she had built. Alexander, for all his control, could no longer hide the truth in his eyes. By the time the gala ended, the contract felt less like a cage and more like a fragile veil about to tear apart. As they left the ballroom, walking hand in hand under the relentless flashes of cameras, Emma whispered, "That was not part of the agreement." Alexander leaned close, his voice low, steady, and impossibly sincere. "Then perhaps it is time we rewrite the rules." Her breath caught, her heart caught fire. And for the first time, Emma realized the greatest danger was not the lie they told the world, but the truth they could no longer deny to themselves. The morning after the gala should have been triumphant. The newspapers praised Alexander Whitmore's dazzling appearance with his fiancée. Investors applauded his newfound image of stability, and the company's stock climbed. On the surface, everything had gone perfectly, but beneath the glittering headlines, a storm was brewing. It began with whispers in the corridors of Whitmore Enterprises. A rival board member, furious at losing influence, had hired a private investigator. The photographs were damning Emma, leaving the flower shop after long shifts, Emma waiting tables at the diner, Emma handing over rent checks at a modest apartment. The narrative was easy to twist. She was not a glamorous fiancée. She was a fraud, a poor girl playing dress-up in the world of the elite. The story leaked to the press within days. Tabloids splashed her face across their covers with cruel headlines. Gold digger or true love? Who really is Alexander Whitmore's fiancée? And from diner waitress to CEO's arm candy. Emma's phone buzzed relentlessly. Strangers flooded her social media with insults, mocking her background, calling her unworthy. At the flower shop, customers whispered behind her back. At the diner, coworkers stared with pity. Her world, once quiet and anonymous, was ripped open under the harsh glare of scrutiny. Inside the penthouse, Emma confronted Alexander, her voice shaking. "They are tearing me apart. They are calling me a liar. You promised this would be business. You promised no one would get hurt." Alexander stood by the window, his hands clenched into fists. His jaw tightened as he stared at the city skyline. "I did not expect someone would dig this deep. I will find out who leaked it." "Oh, that does not change the fact that it is out there," Emma snapped. Do you know what it feels like to be humiliated in front of the entire city? To be called trash? To be reduced to nothing but a cheap story? For once, Alexander was silent. The man who always had answers, who always controlled every situation, looked powerless. The board seized the opportunity. At an emergency meeting, senior members demanded explanations. "This is reckless, Alexander," one sneered. "You have jeopardized our credibility. If she is really your fiancée, she should not be hiding a past like this. Unless, of course, she is not truly your fiancée at all." The implication cut deep. The room filled with accusations, suspicions, and veiled threats to his leadership. When Alexander returned home late that night, Emma was waiting, her eyes red from tears. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "Was I just a pawn to you? A convenient mask to keep your empire intact?" The question stabbed at him, because once, the answer might have been yes. But now, after weeks of watching her kindness, after feeling the pull he could not explain, he knew it was no longer true. "You are not a pawn," he said, his voice rough. "But this world, it is cruel, and I cannot protect you from every blow." Her expression broke. "Then maybe I should not be here at all." "Oh." The words hung heavy in the air, colder than any silence between them. For the first time since their arrangement began, Emma considered walking away, not because of the contract, but because her heart could not endure the pain. The crisis was no longer just about business. It was about trust, dignity, and whether the fragile bond between them could survive the weight of betrayal. And as Alexander watched her retreat into the bedroom, his chest tightened with a realization that terrified him more than losing any deal. He could win every battle in the boardroom, but he was losing the only woman who had ever seen the man beneath the title. The scandal reached its peak when reporters camped outside the Whitmore headquarters, shouting Emma's name, shoving microphones toward her face. Every headline twisted the story further, painting her as a manipulative woman who had trapped the powerful CEO. Emma could not take it anymore. One morning she packed her things in a small suitcase and told Alexander, her voice breaking, "I cannot keep living like this. You do not need me. Your world does not want me." She turned toward the door, but Alexander caught her wrist. His eyes, usually cold steel, now burned with something raw. "You are wrong. I do need you. Not for the board. Not for the deal. For me." Emma froze, tears welling in her eyes. She searched his face, desperate to know if his words were real. That afternoon, at a press conference called by the board, Alexander made his choice. The room was packed with flashing cameras, murmuring investors, and journalists eager for blood. The chairman cleared his throat and asked, "Mr. Whitmore, will you address the allegations regarding your so-called engagement?" Alexander rose slowly from his seat. The room fell silent. He looked out at the sea of skeptical faces, then at Emma, who sat in the corner, bracing for humiliation. "My engagement," he began, his voice strong and unwavering, "is not a business strategy. It is not a lie. It is not a facade for investors. Emma Hayes is the woman I love. She is the one who has stood beside me, not for what I own, but for who I am. And if any of you believe that makes me less capable as a leader, then you do not understand leadership at all." Gasps echoed across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking like gunfire. One board member sneered, "You are risking everything for her." Alexander's gaze sharpened. "Number, I am proving that everything I have built means nothing without integrity, and she is part of that integrity." For the first time, Emma felt the weight lift from her shoulders. He was not hiding her. He was not ashamed. He was standing before the world and choosing her, not as a contract, but as his truth. In that moment, the narrative began to shift. The ruthless CEO was no longer seen as untouchable. He was human, and his vulnerability became his greatest strength. Emma's chest tightened with emotions she could no longer deny. The man who once spoke of rules and contracts had just broken them all for her. The turning point had arrived. Their story was no longer a performance. It was real, and it was unstoppable. The press conference shook the foundations of Whitmore Enterprises. In the days that followed, the media frenzy did not die down, but the story began to change. What had started as scandal now transformed into admiration. Headlines read, "CEO defends love against all odds," and "Alexander Whitmore chooses integrity over power." Investors who once doubted him were forced to reconsider. Shares did not collapse as rivals predicted. In fact, many were impressed by his boldness. For the first time, Alexander's reputation was not just that of a ruthless strategist, but of a man with principles. Meanwhile, the board member who had orchestrated the smear campaign found himself under fire. Journalists uncovered his ties to the very investigator who leaked Emma's past. Documents revealed attempts to manipulate the narrative for personal gain. The hypocrisy was undeniable. Under pressure, he was forced to resign. Justice had a way of finding its mark. Emma, who had once been painted as a fraud, now received messages of support. Women who had worked double jobs to care for family reached out. Saying her story gave them courage. Customers returned to the flower shop, not with whispers of gossip, but with words of encouragement. The same city that once mocked her now saw her as a symbol of resilience. Inside the company, Alexander addressed his team with a clarity that silenced all doubts. Leadership is not about image. It is about authenticity. And from this point forward, this company will operate not just for profit but for people. The room erupted in applause, his authority no longer questioned. For Emma, the greatest justice was not in the headlines but in the quiet moments. She saw the shift in Alexander's eyes, the weight lifted from his shoulders. He no longer carried the burden alone. He had chosen her, not as part of a contract, but as a partner in truth. One evening, as they walked along the river where the city lights shimmered on the water, Emma whispered, "You risked everything for me." Alexander stopped, turning to face her. I risked everything for us." The words settled deep in her heart. The contract that once bound them was nothing but ashes now, replaced by something far stronger. Justice had been served not just in the boardroom, not just in the press, but in the way the world finally saw Emma Hayes for who she truly was, and in the way Alexander Whitmore, the man who once lived for power, learned that true power lay in love and integrity. Weeks passed, and the storm that once threatened to destroy them had finally calmed. The headlines faded, the scandals became yesterday's news, and Whitmore Enterprises stood stronger than ever. But for Alexander and Emma, the real transformation was not in the company's fortunes. It was in their hearts. One crisp evening, Alexander invited Emma back to the same riverwalk where they had shared so many conversations. The skyline glittered in the distance, lights reflecting across the water like scattered stars. Emma wore her usual simplicity, a soft sweater and jeans. Yet to Alexander, she had never looked more radiant. He stopped under a lamppost, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. For a man who had commanded boardrooms and silenced rivals, this was the one moment that truly unsettled him. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but softer than she had ever heard. "When we started this, it was nothing more than a contract, a performance. I told myself it was business, but somewhere along the way, I stopped acting. You became the part of my life I did not know I was missing." Emma's breath caught, her eyes wide. "Alexander." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Slowly, he opened it, revealing a ring far different from the dazzling diamonds of high society. It was elegant, yes, but simple, with a single stone that sparkled under the lamplight. "This ring is not about wealth. It is not about image. It is about us. No contracts, no pretense, no rules. Just the truth. Emma Hayes, will you marry me not as a fiancée for business, but as the woman I love for the rest of my life?" Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at him. The memory of the old contract flashed in her mind, the cold paper that had once bound them. But now, standing here, she realized the contract had already been torn apart by something far more powerful than ink by love. Her voice trembled, but her answer was clear. "Yes, Alexander. 1,000 times yes." "Oh." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in years, Alexander Whitmore felt whole. The kiss that followed was not for cameras, not for investors, not for appearances. It was for them raw, real, and eternal. As they walked hand in hand along the river, Emma whispered, "You know, you never did eat the eggs I made that morning." Alexander chuckled, pulling her closer. "Then make them for me again, this time, as my wife." "Oh." The skyline glowed, the water shimmered, and their footsteps carried them forward into a future no contract could ever dictate. The millionaire who once believed in power above all else had finally found the greatest wealth of all, a love that was real, unconditional, and everlasting.